The golden halls of the palace had seen countless decisions, political, royal, and personal, but none had weighed as heavily on Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum as the matter of his son's heart. The crown prince, Hamdan, beloved not only by the emirate but admired around the globe for his wisdom, poetry, and valor, had walked into his father's study with a silence that said more than words. The air carried the weight of unspoken truths, and Sheikh Mohammed, a father before a ruler in that moment, looked into his son's eyes, searching for clarity, for explanation, for perhaps an echo of his own youthful defiance. Sheikh Mohammed had heard the whispers before they reached him officially. A woman, older, not of typical royal consideration, had taken hold of his son's heart. To many, it seemed absurd, to some, dishonorable. But love is not a servant of protocol. It is a force neither age nor tradition can always command. At first, the ruler of Dubai could not entertain the idea. The legacy, the expectations, the dynasty, everything seemed to hinge on formality and image. He had raised Hamdan with the knowledge of leadership, responsibility, and boundaries. But he had perhaps underestimated the depth of the young man's poetic soul. The tension that day crackled like lightning inside that room. Hamdan, unwavering, spoke not just as a son but as a man who had found a partner of spirit, a woman who saw him not as a prince but as a man capable of being wounded, healed, and transformed. He described her not in titles or lineage, but in verses of purity, how she understood his silence, how she never bowed to his crown but listened to his heart. Sheikh Mohammed listened, his fingers interlaced tightly, his eyes still royal but his heart beginning to soften with every truth his son unveiled. In that moment, Sheikh Mohammed saw a reflection, not in the face of his son, but in the choice. He remembered his own battles between duty and desire, between tradition and rebellion. Age had given him wisdom, but wisdom now whispered that perhaps legacy was not only in bloodlines and alliances, but in the courage to love rightly, not just royally. And so, though his tongue remained still, his heart shifted. He didn't smile, nor did he give his blessing with immediate grandeur. But he asked to meet her. That in itself was the first stone laid on a bridge once thought impassable. When the day came that she entered the palace, elegant in spirit, humble in manner, Sheikh Mohammed watched her every gesture. She neither feared nor flaunted. She stood tall but bowed respectfully. Her eyes met his with reverence, not resistance. She addressed him not with desperation but with dignity. She spoke of her intentions not with persuasion but with purpose. It was then that he realized, this woman, regardless of age or background, held Hamdan's joy like one would guard a sacred flame. That could not be faked. The royal father found himself moved by something beyond logic. He was moved by how his son became in her presence. There was lightness in his voice, calm in his aura, and fire in his convictions. He was not diminished by her presence, he was made fuller. Sheikh Mohammed watched, over days and then weeks, how this relationship did not demand anything from the crown, yet gave everything to the man beneath it. He began to understand that sometimes the heart leads us to what royalty cannot provide, a sense of being known. What followed was not a public decree nor a lavish celebration. The acceptance was private, sacred. One evening under the desert stars, father and son rode together, as they often did in silence, their bond forged in movement and moonlight. And there, Sheikh Mohammed spoke not as a ruler but as a father warned from resisting love's tide. If she brings you peace, then my resistance was not protection, it was fear, he said. And fear has no place in a heart that loves truly. Hamdan did not respond with words, but his eyes glistened with a gratitude that needed no language. The family, once hesitant, began to shift as well. Slowly, with Sheikh Mohammed's subtle nod, the palace gates opened to her. She did not demand position or glory, she remained in the background, respectful of royal lines, but her presence illuminated every room she entered. The older women of the family, once skeptical, found in her wisdom and warmth the familiarity of sisterhood. The younger ones saw her as a living poem, a muse who had turned their beloved Fazza into a man more grounded, more gentle, more whole. Sheikh Mohammed came to realize that age was not her greatest difference, it was her depth. A depth earned not through calendars but through character. And in the quiet moments of his own solitude, he found himself thinking of her not as the older woman, but as the woman who had done what few could: unlock the next chapter of his son's soul. She had not changed Hamdan, she had revealed him. And for that, the father who once resisted now offered silent blessings each night as he prayed. At a private family gathering, when the closest of blood and bond were present, Sheikh Mohammed finally lifted his glass and spoke. We speak of alliances and loyalty, of diplomacy and legacy. But today, I raise a toast to a truth simpler and stronger than all of these: the courage to love where love is found. The room stilled. Hamdan met his father's eyes, and for the first time in this journey, the Sheikh's proud smile carved through the centuries of royal formality. It was not approval, it was celebration. The world may never fully know the magnitude of that decision. To many, it will remain a quiet evolution within palace walls. But to those who live in the heart of love's battlefield, it is a victory of epic proportions. Sheikh Mohammed, once adamant, now walks past the couple and nods not just as a father, but as a man who surrendered to truth. In his wisdom, he realized that sometimes the kingdom we guard the most is the one built between two hearts, and no crown can outshine the light that radiates from genuine love. And so, with the city lights of Dubai glittering in the backdrop of a changing dynasty, a father's resistance gave way to a ruler's enlightenment. The decision was not just about accepting a love story, it was about recognizing that history must evolve with the hearts that carry it forward. Sheikh Mohammed had not lost control, he had relinquished fear. And in doing so, he preserved the noblest legacy of all: the freedom to love and be loved without. In the days that followed, a sense of serenity settled within the palace, not born from tradition but from transformation. Sheikh Mohammed watched his son with new eyes, eyes not burdened by the rigid expectations of legacy, but softened by the clarity that love had brought to their family. He saw how Hamdan began to write again with greater depth, how his poems carried less longing and more presence. He had always been a poet of dreams, but now he was a poet of truth, and the woman beside him had become the muse that gave life to that truth. At the royal stables, where once father and son had trained stallions in silence, there was now the sound of shared laughter. The space between them was no longer tense with misunderstanding but rich with mutual respect. Even the horses seemed to sense the change, responding more gently to Hamdan's hand, mirroring the shift in his heart. The older woman, now quietly acknowledged within the inner circle, would sometimes join, not as a royal guest, but as one who belonged, seated quietly, observing with a grace that neither competed nor conformed. Conversations around the palace began to change. What was once a tale told in hushed tones became a symbol of change itself. Ministers and relatives, who initially struggled to accept this unconventional match, saw how Sheikh Mohammed had not diminished his rule by accepting love, but had elevated it by demonstrating courage. The older generation, rooted in structure, now found themselves re-evaluating what legacy truly meant. Was it the continuation of names, or the continuation of truth? During one evening at a family poetry reading, Sheikh Hamdan read a piece he had never shared before. It was about a son watching a father wrestle with shadows until he finally opened the window and let the light in. His voice was calm but powerful, and as he read, he looked directly at his father. The words did not seek permission, they gave thanks. And Sheikh Mohammed, seated in silence among his children and grandchildren, felt something swell in his chest that surpassed pride. It was redemption, quiet and undeniable. As Dubai's skyline continued to rise, so too did the respect for the story unfolding behind palace walls. International figures who once speculated now saluted. They saw in Sheikh Mohammed not a ruler clinging to tradition, but a father evolving with time. The world whispered less about the age gap and more about the love that defied hierarchy. It became a private emblem of what could be accomplished when power bends gently before love. The woman who once stood uncertain in royal corridors now moved through them with ease, not because of a title, but because of trust. She did not wear crowns or command ceremonies. Her power was in presence, in the way Hamdan's spirit lit up with every glance she offered him. Together, they became more than a couple. They became a narrative of change, of gentle defiance, of choosing heart over heritage without compromising either. Sheikh Mohammed began inviting her to private council dinners. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her insights were sharp and filled with empathy. Ministers who had initially dismissed her due to age or background now found themselves disarmed by her intelligence. It became clear that her maturity wasn't just chronological, it was spiritual. She brought balance to rooms heavy with ambition, grounding every conversation in humanity. One afternoon, while walking in the royal gardens with Hamdan, Sheikh Mohammed paused and turned to his son. "Do you remember when I taught you how to ride horses without fear?" he asked. Hamdan smiled. "Yes, father. You said to trust the horse, but never let go of the reins." Sheikh Mohammed placed a hand on his son's shoulder and whispered, "In love, I've learned the opposite. Sometimes you must let go of the reins so that trust can lead you to places fear never will." There was a quiet celebration in the desert, far from cameras and formalities. A tent lit by golden lanterns, surrounded by dunes that seemed to listen more than they watched. It was there that the couple shared a moment not meant for history books, but for the soul. No throne, no gold, just love, supported by a father who once resisted, now fully surrendered to the wisdom of the heart. That night, even the desert wind moved as if in blessing. In royal circles, the change became known as the silent reform. Not a law passed, not a speech delivered, but a shift felt in every corner of the palace. A new standard had been set, not in documents, but in decisions. That sometimes the boldest move for a ruler is not in declaring war or passing judgment, but in choosing to understand what he once feared. Sheikh Mohammed had not only preserved the dignity of the monarchy, he had deepened its soul. Hamdan, in his poetry and in his eyes, began to reflect a man who was no longer fighting to be understood, but grateful to be accepted. He moved through Dubai with a new peace, a new gravity. And those who followed him, young princes, rising poets, even distant cousins, now saw that to love deeply was not a weakness, but a strength that even kings must kneel before. And so, beneath the ever-changing skies of Dubai, amidst the legacy of a nation built on vision, stood a story that would be whispered for generations. Not of battles won or towers built, but of a father's decision that changed the course of his son's heart, and in doing so, redefined the true crown of a royal soul. Love without